A wealthy high school boardroom thought humiliating one black girl in public would be easy. Wrong choice. What started as a few racist jokes, fake smiles, and one arrogant golden boy athlete trying to put her in her place, turned into a full-scale collapse involving secret cover-ups, deleted evidence, missing students, corruption, and a live stream that destroyed an entire elite school in front of the country. But here's the crazy part. They thought Naomi Carter would stay quiet. They thought fear worked on everybody. 5 minutes later, she started taking all of them down. And trust me, the ending gets way darker, messier, and more satisfying than you think. Stay until the end, because every twist changes the entire story. And before we start, comment where you're watching this video from. Naomi Carter knew the moment she stepped onto the Westbridge Academy campus that she did not belong there, at least not in the eyes of the people staring at her. The school looked less like a public high school and more like a private university built for the children of senators and CEOs. Massive brick buildings towered over perfectly trimmed lawns. Luxury cars lined the student parking lot. Girls wearing designer boots walked through the halls with iced coffees in their hands, while boys in varsity jackets laughed loud enough to make sure everyone heard them. Naomi tightened her grip on the strap of her backpack as dozens of eyes followed her down the main hallway. Some students whispered openly. Others simply stared too long. She had transferred schools before. She understood curiosity. But this felt different. This felt like evaluation. A blonde girl leaning against a locker glanced at Naomi's schedule and smirked at her friends. Advanced calculus, she muttered. Interesting choice. The girls laughed quietly. Naomi ignored them and kept walking, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her uncomfortable. She had spent most of her life learning how to survive rooms where people underestimated her before she even opened her mouth. Westbridge was just another room. Unfortunately, the room already belonged to someone else. Grayson Hale entered the hallway like he owned the building. Conversations lowered the second he appeared. Tall, athletic, wearing a gold and black varsity jacket with his last name stitched across the chest. He moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who had never once been told no. Students greeted him constantly as he passed. Teachers smiled at him. One coach slapped him on the shoulder proudly. Naomi immediately understood the hierarchy here, and Grayson stood at the top of it. His eyes landed on her. He slowed slightly, studying her with a smile that never reached his eyes. "You're the new girl," he said casually. "Naomi." "Right." She nodded once. "Westbridge is pretty competitive," he continued. "Hope the transition isn't too overwhelming." The tone sounded polite. The implication underneath it was not. Naomi met his gaze directly. "I think I'll survive." A few nearby students exchanged looks. Grayson tilted his head slightly, amused by the response. "Confidence," he said. "That's rare around here." Before Naomi could answer, the warning bell rang. Grayson stepped aside dramatically, gesturing toward the hallway. "After you." It sounded respectful. It felt like a challenge. Advanced calculus was worse. The classroom was filled with students who looked like they had known each other their entire lives. Naomi took an empty seat near the back while conversations buzzed around her. Several students openly glanced toward her before whispering behind raised hands. At the front of the room stood Mr. Harper, an older teacher with tired eyes and the forced enthusiasm of someone close to retirement. He welcomed Naomi quickly, before immediately moving on with class, as if he wanted to avoid drawing attention to her. Unfortunately, attention found her anyway. Halfway through class, Mr. Harper called Grayson to the board to solve a difficult problem. Grayson walked up confidently, spinning the marker in his hand, while several girls watched him like he was performing on stage. He wrote out the equation quickly and stepped back with a grin. "Mr." Harper nodded immediately. "Excellent work." "Grayson." Naomi frowned. The answer was wrong. Not slightly wrong. Completely wrong. For a moment, she considered staying quiet. First day. New school. New enemies. But then she noticed the way Grayson glanced around the room, already expecting admiration, before anyone had even checked the solution. The arrogance irritated her more than the mistake itself. Naomi raised her hand. The room became strangely quiet. "Mr. Harper blinked. "Yes." "Naomi." She stood slowly. "The equation collapses in the second step," she said calmly. "He distributed the negative incorrectly." Several students turned toward the board. Grayson's smile faded slightly. "Mr." Harper adjusted his glasses. I don't believe Naomi walked forward before he could finish, took the marker from the tray, and rewrote the equation beneath Grayson's work. Every movement felt louder than it should have. She solved the problem carefully, line by line, until the final answer appeared. Silence. Then someone near the windows laughed. Another student joined in. Within seconds, half the class was trying not to laugh openly. Grayson's jaw tightened as he stared at the board. For the first time since entering the school, he looked genuinely embarrassed. "Mr." Harper cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well, it appears Naomi is correct." That was the moment everything changed. Naomi returned to her seat without smiling. But she could feel the atmosphere shifting around her. Not acceptance. Not respect. Something more dangerous. She had humiliated the most powerful student in school in front of an audience. Grayson never looked at the board again for the rest of class. He looked only at her. When the bell rang, students immediately flooded into the hallway, buzzing about what had happened. Naomi grabbed her books and headed toward the door. But someone stepped into her path before she could leave. Elena Brooks. Beautiful. Composed. Effortlessly popular. The kind of girl who knew exactly how much influence she carried. She crossed her arms and lowered her voice slightly. "You really shouldn't have done that." Naomi kept her expression neutral. "Done what?" "Solved the problem." Elena glanced down the hallway toward Grayson, who was surrounded by football players near the lockers. Embarrassed him. He embarrassed himself. Elena looked at Naomi for a long second before sighing quietly. "Listen carefully," she said. "At this school, nobody wins against Grayson Hale." Before Naomi could respond, Grayson's voice echoed from behind her. "You think you're smarter than me." The hallway suddenly became silent again. Naomi turned slowly. Grayson stood only a few feet away now, his friends lingering behind him like bodyguards. The smile from earlier was gone completely. "I corrected a math problem," Naomi replied calmly. Grayson stepped closer. "No," he said softly. "You tried to make me look stupid." Naomi refused to back away. "If that happened, maybe that's your problem." Several students gasped under their breath. For one tense second, it looked like Grayson might actually lose control. His jaw flexed, his fists tightened slightly at his sides. Then his expression changed again. Calm, cold, dangerous. "You should learn how things work here," he said quietly. Naomi noticed movement farther down the hallway. "Miss Bennett." A younger teacher carrying folders against her chest had stopped just long enough to hear the conversation. Their eyes met briefly. Naomi expected her to intervene. Instead, Ms. Bennett lowered her gaze and kept walking. That bothered Naomi more than the threat itself. Grayson leaned in slightly closer. "Trust me," he whispered. "People who make scenes don't last long at Westbridge." Then he walked away. The crowd slowly dispersed. pretending they had not witnessed anything. An hour later, Naomi stood alone in front of her assigned locker near the athletic wing. The hallway was nearly empty now. She exhaled slowly, trying to convince herself the day was over. Maybe Elena was exaggerating. Maybe Grayson was just another spoiled rich kid who hated being embarrassed. Maybe. Naomi spun the lock open and pulled the locker door wide. Then she froze. Taped to the inside was a printed photo of her taken earlier that morning when she entered the building. Across her face, written in thick red marker, were the words, "Know your place." The hallway suddenly felt much colder. And for the first time since arriving at Westbridge Academy, Naomi realized this was no longer simple school bullying. Someone wanted war. By the next morning, everyone at Westbridge Academy knew Naomi Carter's name. Not because she was the new student, not because she had solved an advanced calculus problem, but because someone had turned her into entertainment. The second Naomi walked through the front entrance, she felt it. Conversations stopping mid-sentence. Students glancing at their phones before looking up at her. Smirks, laughter quickly hidden behind hands. She kept walking, refusing to react. But the pressure followed her through every hallway like smoke. When she reached her locker, she finally pulled out her phone and understood why. A meme had spread across nearly every student account overnight. Someone had edited her yearbook photo onto an image of a prison jumpsuit with the caption, "Westbridge Diversity Scholarship Starter Pack." Underneath were hundreds of laughing emojis and comments, pretending it was just dark humor. Naomi stared at the screen silently, while anger crawled slowly into her chest. It was not just cruelty. It was organized. Fast. Deliberate. Someone wanted the entire school to see her as a joke before she even had the chance to exist there. The cafeteria became worse. Naomi entered carrying her tray and immediately felt the atmosphere shift. Tables filled with athletes, cheerleaders, debate students, wealthy kids wearing expensive watches. All of them seemed connected by an invisible social code she had not been invited into. She searched for a seat, but every time she approached a table, conversations suddenly became awkward. Some students avoided eye contact. Others openly stared at her like they were waiting for a reaction. Near the center of the room, Grayson Hale sat surrounded by football players, laughing loudly while scrolling through his phone. Naomi did not need to see the screen to know what they were looking at. Elena Brooks suddenly appeared beside her, carrying an iced coffee, and wearing an expression that looked almost sympathetic. "You shouldn't sit alone," Elena said softly. "People notice that here." Naomi studied her carefully before sitting across from her at a quieter table near the windows. "Funny," Naomi replied. "Seems like people notice me anyway." Elena gave a small laugh. "Westbridge can be intense. People talk, especially when Grayson's involved." There it was again. Grayson's name spoken like a warning label. For the next 20 minutes, Elena acted friendly, asking about Naomi's old school, her mother, where she lived, whether she planned to stay at Westbridge permanently. The questions came casually, smoothly, almost too smoothly. Naomi answered carefully, noticing the way Elena occasionally glanced toward Grayson's table. Once, Grayson looked directly at them and Elena immediately lowered her voice. "You really embarrassed him yesterday," Elena whispered. Naomi stabbed her fork into her food. "He embarrassed himself. You still don't understand how this place works," Elena replied quietly. Before Naomi could respond, her phone vibrated violently in her hand. A notification appeared across the screen. School account access denied. Her student email logged out automatically. Then the grading portal disappeared. Then her online class schedule vanished entirely. Naomi frowned and tried again. Nothing worked. Across the cafeteria, Grayson raised his plastic cup slightly toward her like a silent toast. The game had officially started. Things escalated quickly after that. By afternoon, one of Naomi's teachers accused her of missing an online assignment she had already submitted. Another claimed her login credentials had attempted unauthorized access to school files. During chemistry, Naomi opened her backpack and found her test paper ripped clean down the middle before she could turn it in. The teacher looked irritated rather than concerned. "You need to take more responsibility for your materials," he said coldly. Every problem somehow circled back to her. By the end of the day, students had stopped pretending they were not involved. Someone shoulder-checked Naomi hard enough near the gym lockers to nearly knock her books from her hands. A group of football players barked fake apologies while laughing. Another student muttered, "Maybe she'll accuse us of racism too." Naomi clenched her jaw and kept walking. But she could feel herself becoming isolated, inch by inch. Nobody wanted to stand beside the new girl everyone powerful had decided to target. Then came the cheating accusation. Naomi arrived in advanced calculus to find Mr. IC2. Harper waiting beside her desk with crossed arms. On top of the desk sat a copy of tomorrow's exam packet. The room fell silent. "We found this in the printer room under your student ID login." "Mr." Harper announced. Naomi stared at him in disbelief. Several students immediately pulled out phones. "Mr." Harper's disappointment already sounded rehearsed. "Academic dishonesty is taken very seriously at Westbridge." Naomi felt dozens of eyes burning into her skin. "I didn't print that." Grayson leaned back casually in his chair. Maybe Westbridge is harder than she expected. Laughter spread quietly across the room. Naomi turned toward him instantly. "You did this?" Grayson raised his hands innocently. "Careful. False accusations are serious too." For one dangerous second, Naomi almost lost control. She could feel exactly what he wanted: anger, reaction. Proof that she was unstable enough to become the villain in their story. Instead, she forced herself to breathe. An hour later, she sat across from Principal Vaughn, inside a polished office, decorated with football trophies and donor plaques. The principal listened with fake patience, while Naomi explained everything: the hacked account, the memes, the RIP test, the planted exam papers. But the expression on his face never changed. Finally, he folded his hands calmly. "Naomi, Westbridge is a community. Students here have known each other for years. Sometimes integration takes effort from both sides." Naomi stared at him. "Are you blaming me?" "I'm suggesting," Vaughn replied carefully, "that constantly creating conflict may not help your situation." Conflict. That word hit harder than yelling would have. Not harassment. Not racism. Not bullying. Conflict. Naomi walked out of the office feeling colder than before. The school was not ignoring what was happening. The school was protecting it. As she passed through the nearly empty athletic hallway after school, something caught her attention near the ceiling. A security camera pointed directly toward the lockers where her photo had been planted yesterday. Naomi hesitated, then quietly turned toward the security office nearby. After 10 tense minutes of searching public monitor logs while the office assistant stepped away, Naomi finally found the footage archive from yesterday afternoon. Or at least she tried to. The file was gone. Deleted. Not corrupted. Not missing accidentally. Deleted intentionally. Naomi's stomach tightened. Someone with access to school security had erased the evidence. She stepped back slowly from the monitor, her heartbeat growing louder in her ears. This was bigger than Grayson pulling pranks. Bigger than high school cruelty. Somebody inside the system was helping him. "You're looking in the wrong place." Naomi turned sharply. A tall boy wearing a dark hoodie stood at the end of the hallway, hands shoved into his pockets. Marcus Reed. Quiet. Invisible. The kind of student nobody noticed. Before Naomi could speak, Marcus quickly walked forward and shoved a small USB drive into her hand. His eyes darted nervously toward the hallway behind her. Then he spoke in a low voice. "They've done this before." And before Naomi could stop him, he disappeared into the crowd. Naomi did not open the USB drive immediately. She waited until she got home, locked her bedroom door, and pulled the blinds shut before sliding it into her laptop. Outside her window, rain tapped softly against the glass. But inside the room the silence felt heavy enough to suffocate her. For a few seconds, nothing appeared except a single video file labeled Hall B7. Naomi hesitated before clicking play. Grainy security footage filled the screen. A school hallway. Late afternoon. Empty, except for one boy standing near a locker with books pressed tightly against his chest. He was black, thin, nervous. Naomi did not recognize him. The timestamp showed the recording was from nearly a year earlier. Then Grayson Hale entered the frame with 3 football players behind him. Naomi watched as the boy immediately stiffened in fear. Even through silent footage, the imbalance of power was obvious. Grayson cornered him against the lockers while the others laughed. One of them grabbed the boy's backpack and dumped everything across the floor. Another recorded on his phone. The boy tried to leave. Grayson shoved him hard against the metal lockers. Naomi felt her stomach tighten as the video continued. Students passed through the hallway. Nobody stopped. Nobody helped. Then came the worst part. Grayson leaned close to the boy's face and said something that caused the others to burst out laughing. The boy's expression collapsed completely. Humiliation. Fear. Defeat. A few seconds later, the footage abruptly ended. Naomi stared at the frozen screen long after the video stopped moving. At the bottom of the file sat a student name attached to the archive. Isaiah Brooks. The next morning, Naomi searched the school database for him during study period in the library. Nothing. No current records. No yearbook page. No transfer information. It was as if Isaiah Brooks had been erased from Westbridge Academy entirely. Naomi finally found a single mention buried deep inside an old athletics newsletter, stating that Isaiah had withdrawn unexpectedly during the previous semester. No explanation. No goodbye. Just gone. Naomi leaned back slowly in her chair while students whispered around her between shelves lined with expensive textbooks and trophies. Something about the entire situation felt wrong. Schools did not accidentally delete students from their history unless someone wanted them forgotten. Looking for someone, Naomi looked up sharply. Ms. Bennett stood beside the table holding a stack of essays against her chest. Unlike the other teachers at Westbridge, she always looked slightly uncomfortable inside the building. As if she understood something about the school nobody else wanted to admit. Naomi quickly minimized the screen. But Ms. Bennett had already seen enough. I saw the name, she said quietly. Isaiah Brooks. Naomi studied her carefully. Do you know what happened to him for a moment, Ms.? Bennett said nothing. Her eyes shifted briefly toward the library entrance before she lowered her voice. You need to stop asking questions about certain students. That's not an answer. No, Ms. Bennett replied softly. It's a warning. She started to walk away, then stopped. Without turning back, she added, check the old disciplinary archives. Basement level. Then she disappeared between the shelves. Naomi waited until lunch before sneaking downstairs beneath the administration building where old student records were stored. Dust covered most of the filing cabinets. The basement smelled like paper and mold. She spent nearly an hour searching through outdated disciplinary reports until a pattern slowly began to appear. Different names, different years, but the same details repeated over and over again. Minority students, scholarship students, quiet disappearances after conflicts involving athletes or wealthy donors' children, complaints filed and then withdrawn, harassment reports marked resolved internally. Naomi's pulse quickened with every folder she opened. Westbridge Academy did not just tolerate bullying. It buried it. The deeper Naomi dug, the more terrified the adults around her seemed to become. Teachers who initially answered simple questions suddenly avoided eye contact. One office assistant physically stepped away when Naomi mentioned Grayson's name. Even Mr. Harper, who had once corrected Grayson publicly in calculus, refused to speak when Naomi asked about Isaiah Brooks. "You should focus on your own education," he muttered nervously before hurrying away. That was when Naomi realized the truth. The teachers were afraid of the Hale family. Not annoyed, not uncomfortable. Afraid. Everyone at Westbridge acted like Grayson was untouchable because, somehow, he was. By late afternoon, Naomi headed toward the athletic wing after receiving a text from an unknown number saying, "Check the storage room under the stadium." She almost ignored it, but curiosity pulled her forward. The lower hallway beneath the football stadium was dark and mostly empty, except for flickering fluorescent lights overhead. Equipment cages lined the concrete walls. Naomi reached the old storage room and slowly pushed the door open. Inside sat shelves stacked with damaged helmets and unused gym equipment. At first, the room appeared empty. Then the door slammed shut behind her. Naomi spun around instantly. Grayson leaned against the closed door with his hands in his pockets. Completely calm. "You've been busy," he said quietly. Naomi's heartbeat jumped hard against her ribs, but she forced herself not to step backward. "Following me now," Grayson smirked faintly. "You're not that hard to track." The silence inside the storage room felt dangerous. Heavy. Naomi noticed there were no security cameras in the corner of the ceiling. Of course there weren't. "You framed me," Naomi said coldly. "You harassed other students. Isaiah Brooks disappeared after you targeted him." For the first time, Grayson's expression darkened slightly. "Careful," he said. "You're starting to sound obsessed." Naomi crossed her arms tightly. "What happened to him?" Grayson stared at her for several long seconds before speaking again. "You think you're the first person who tried to stand against me?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Naomi said nothing. Grayson stepped closer slowly, his voice dropping lower. "Every year somebody decides they're going to expose the big evil Grayson Hale." He smiled without warmth. "And every year they disappear." Naomi refused to look away, even as fear crept coldly through her chest. "You don't scare me." "That's the problem," Grayson replied softly. "You should be scared." Then his eyes narrowed slightly. "And honestly, I expected better from Elena." Naomi froze. For half a second, her brain stopped processing. Elena. She had never told anyone Elena knew about her investigation. Not Marcus. Not Ms. Bennett. No one. Yet somehow Grayson knew. Which meant only one thing. Someone close to her was feeding him information. Grayson noticed the realization hit her and smiled slowly. "See," he said, "that's why people lose around here. You still think you know who your friends are." He opened the storage room door and walked away before Naomi could stop him. For several seconds she remained frozen in the middle of the dark room, replaying every conversation from the last 2 days inside her head. Elena warning her. Elena sitting beside her in the cafeteria. Elena asking questions about her life. Questions about where she went after school. Questions about who she talked to. Naomi pulled out her phone with shaking fingers. A new text message had appeared from an unknown number. Only 4 words. Don't trust Elena. By Thursday morning, Naomi Carter stopped trying to survive Westbridge Academy quietly. Fear had already spread through every hallway like poison. And the worst part was not the bullying itself. It was the silence surrounding it. Students watched everything happen and looked away. Teachers lowered their voices whenever the Hale family was mentioned. Even the adults who clearly knew the truth behaved like employees protecting a corporation instead of educators protecting children. Naomi barely slept after the anonymous message warning her not to trust Elena. She spent half the night replaying every conversation in her head, while Isaiah Brooks' terrified face from the USB footage haunted her thoughts. Grayson had said people disappeared every year. He had not sounded like someone making empty threats. He had sounded proud of it. By the time Naomi walked onto campus that morning, something inside her had changed. She was done reacting, done waiting. If Westbridge wanted a fight, she would force the entire school to watch it happen in public. The opportunity came faster than expected. Advanced calculus began like every other class that week. Tense silence. Whispered gossip. Phones glowing beneath desks. Naomi could feel students glancing at her every few seconds. Some looked entertained. Others looked nervous. Grayson entered late wearing his varsity jacket, laughing with 2 football players before dropping casually into his seat near the center row. The classroom atmosphere shifted immediately around him, like gravity pulling everyone into his orbit. Mr. Harper began reviewing the upcoming midterm, while Naomi stared at the back of Grayson's chair. Hearing his voice from the storage room echo inside her head. Every year they disappear. Her pulse quickened. Then she noticed something sitting partially exposed inside Grayson's open backpack beside his desk. A folded copy of her ripped chemistry test. Naomi froze. For 1 second she almost doubted herself. Then Grayson casually pushed the paper deeper into the bag with his foot after noticing her stare. The movement was small, careless, arrogant, like he genuinely believed nobody would ever challenge him openly. That was the moment Naomi stood up. The sound of her chair scraping across the floor cut through the room instantly. Mr. Harper blinked. Naomi. She ignored him. Eyes locked on Grayson. You framed me? The room went completely silent. Grayson leaned back slowly in his chair. Excuse me? You hacked my school account. You planted exam papers under my login. And you stole my chemistry test. Naomi pointed directly at his bag. It's in there. Several students immediately looked toward Grayson's backpack. Mr. Harper stepped forward nervously. Naomi. Sit down. No. She snapped without looking away from Grayson. Everybody here knows what he's been doing. A low murmur spread through the classroom. Phones quietly appeared beneath desks. Naomi could feel the tension building like pressure inside a sealed room. Grayson stared at her for several seconds without moving. His expression remained calm, but the muscles in his jaw tightened slightly. You should be careful making accusations, he said softly. Naomi walked forward another step. Why? Because your father owns the school board. Because everyone's too scared to stop you. The class collectively stopped breathing. Mr. Harper looked horrified. That's enough. But Naomi kept going. Days of humiliation, isolation, and manipulation finally exploded out of her all at once. You did the same thing to Isaiah Brooks. Didn't you? She demanded. And everybody covered it up. The second Isaiah's name left her mouth, Grayson's entire face changed. The mask disappeared. The coldness underneath it was worse. He stood up slowly. You need to shut your mouth, he said quietly. Naomi refused to move. Or what? What happened next? Felt so sudden the room almost failed to process it in real time. Grayson crossed the distance between them in seconds. Then he grabbed Naomi violently by the arm and slammed his hand across her mouth. Gasps exploded across the classroom. Naomi's eyes widened in shock as Grayson held her in place hard enough to hurt. His face hovered inches from hers. All restraint finally gone. "I said," he hissed through clenched teeth. "Shut up." For one horrifying moment, nobody moved. Not Mr. Harper. Not the students. Nobody. The entire classroom sat frozen in absolute silence, while Grayson physically restrained Naomi in broad daylight. Several students stared in disbelief. Others looked terrified. One girl near the windows actually lowered her eyes toward her desk instead of helping. Naomi struggled violently and finally shoved Grayson backward hard enough to break free. She stumbled against a desk, breathing heavily. While rage and humiliation burned through her chest, Grayson stared at her like he barely recognized himself anymore. The room remained deathly silent. Then Naomi heard it. A voice from the back row. "Oh my God, this is live." Every head turned. A student from the media club stood near the rear of the classroom holding up a phone. The screen displayed a live stream already flooded with comments. Someone had been broadcasting the entire confrontation online in real time. Grayson's expression flickered for the first time. "Panic, turn that off." He snapped instantly. But it was too late. Within seconds, students throughout the hallway outside were checking their phones. Notifications spread across campus. Messages exploded through group chats. Naomi could actually hear muffled voices gathering outside the classroom door. "Mr. Harper finally found his voice. Everybody put your phones away right now." Nobody listened. Grayson lunged toward the student live streaming. But the boy backed away quickly, while still recording. Naomi stood trembling beside the desks, one hand against her arm where Grayson had grabbed her. For the first time since arriving at Westbridge, the school had witnessed the real version of him, not the charming athlete, not the untouchable golden boy, but the violent person underneath. And he knew it. Less than 10 minutes later, the video vanished. Not removed by the student. Deleted. Every repost disappeared from school servers simultaneously. Media club accounts suddenly logged out. Shared links stopped working. Students stared at blank screens in confusion, while administrators rushed through the hallways confiscating phones. By lunchtime, Principal Vaughn released an official statement claiming the incident had been misunderstood. Horseplay escalated by social media misinformation. Horseplay. Naomi sat alone on the second-floor hallway bench staring at her dead phone screen in disbelief. The evidence was gone almost instantly. Like the school had rehearsed this exact crisis before. Teachers avoided looking at her as they passed. Students whispered nervously nearby. Westbridge was trying to erase reality again. Then someone sat beside her quietly. Marcus Reed. He kept his hood up while slipping his phone from his pocket. "You really thought they'd leave the video online?" he asked softly. Naomi looked at him sharply. Marcus tapped his screen once. The deleted footage began playing. Every second. Every word. Every moment of Grayson grabbing her mouth in front of the class. "I downloaded it before they wiped the servers," Marcus whispered. Naomi stared at the screen. Stunned, Marcus glanced nervously down the hallway before lowering his voice even further. "They're already trying to bury it." Then he pressed upload. A second later, the video appeared publicly on local TikTok feeds outside the school network. Within minutes, the views began climbing. Fast. By Friday morning, the entire city was watching Westbridge Academy burn online. The video spread faster than anyone expected. At first, it stayed local students reposting clips, anonymous accounts, uploading edited versions, reaction videos flooding TikTok and Instagram within hours. But by midnight, hashtags connected to the incident had crossed state lines. Westbridge assault trended alongside clips showing Grayson Hale grabbing Naomi Carter in the middle of class, while terrified students sat frozen around them. Some viewers focused on the violence itself. Others focused on something even worse. Nobody had tried to stop him. The internet dissected every frame mercilessly. Teachers were identified. Students were identified. Even the school crest on the classroom wall became recognizable. By sunrise, local reporters had already parked outside the campus gates. Inside the Hale mansion, panic replaced arrogance for the first time. Grayson sat in the massive living room scrolling furiously through thousands of comments while his father shouted into a phone nearby. Expensive artwork lined the walls, but the atmosphere felt more like a war room than a family home. Every television displayed the same looping footage of Grayson, pinning his hand over Naomi's mouth, while headlines questioned whether Westbridge Academy protected violent students. Mrs. Hale paced beside the marble fireplace, clutching her wine glass so tightly her knuckles turned white. She provoked him. She snapped angrily. That girl knew exactly what she was doing. No, Mr. Hale replied coldly while muting another news segment. She embarrassed him publicly. Twice. And now we clean this up. Two lawyers entered moments later, carrying tablets and legal folders. Grayson looked up sharply as one of them sat across from him. From this moment forward, the lawyer said calmly, you do not post, comment, apologize, or react emotionally to anything online. Understood? Grayson's jaw tightened. She lied about me. The lawyer barely blinked. Truth is irrelevant now. Perception matters. At Westbridge Academy, administrators moved through the halls, like emergency responders containing a disaster. Students whispered over their phones between classes while teachers pretended everything was normal. It was not normal. Every hallway carried tension now. Every conversation stopped the second Naomi walked past. Some students looked at her with sympathy. Others looked at her with resentment, like she had destroyed the reputation of something they loved. Naomi's notifications became impossible to keep up with. Strangers online called her brave. Others called her manipulative. Her face spread across social media beside captions accusing her of trying to ruin a young man's future for attention. She wants fame. She's playing victim. Another scholarship student causing problems. She should have stayed quiet. The cruelty became endless. By lunchtime, someone had already edited dramatic music behind the classroom video and turned the incident into entertainment again. Naomi sat alone in her bedroom that evening, staring blankly at thousands of comments flooding her screen, while her mother argued nervously on the phone downstairs with relatives begging them to leave town temporarily. Every notification felt like another hand pulling at her identity from different directions. To some people, she was a hero. To others, she was a liar, destroying innocent lives. The worst part was realizing how many adults immediately chose Grayson's side despite seeing the video with their own eyes. Because Grayson Hale looked like someone worth protecting, Naomi did not. The emergency school board meeting happened the following night inside Westbridge's massive conference hall. Wealthy parents filled the room wearing tailored suits and expensive jewelry, while reporters waited outside the building under bright camera lights. Principal Vaughn stood near the front, sweating beneath the pressure, while board members whispered nervously among themselves. Naomi sat beside her mother near the back row, feeling hundreds of eyes drift toward her every few seconds. Grayson arrived 10 minutes later with his parents and legal team surrounding him like security detail. The second he entered the room, the atmosphere shifted violently. Some parents stood to greet the Hales immediately. Others avoided eye contact entirely. Principal Vaughn cleared his throat at the podium. Westbridge Academy takes student safety very seriously. A woman near the front interrupted sharply. Then why is the school being humiliated across the country? Murmurs spread across the room. Another parent stood up instantly. Because that girl turned private school discipline into a media circus, Naomi's mother stiffened beside her. The woman pointed directly toward Naomi without hesitation. My son has attended this school for 7 years. We have never had these kinds of problems until she arrived. Several parents nodded. Naomi felt heat crawl into her face as dozens of eyes locked onto her again. Principal Vaughn did nothing to stop it. She provoked Grayson repeatedly. Another father added loudly, "The boy made a mistake." But now his future's being destroyed because she wanted attention online. Naomi finally stood up. "He assaulted me." The room exploded into overlapping voices immediately. "Don't exaggerate. He barely touched her. She's weaponizing racism." "Sit down," Naomi looked toward Principal Vaughn desperately, waiting for him to regain control. Instead, he adjusted his tie and spoke carefully into the microphone. "Emotions are understandably high right now. However, we should all remember that misunderstandings between students can escalate quickly in stressful academic environments." Misunderstanding. Again. Not assault. Not harassment. A misunderstanding. Naomi realized then that the school had already chosen its narrative. Her mother rose furiously beside her. "My daughter was humiliated publicly, and your school is protecting the boy who did it." Mr. Dot. Hale stood calmly from the opposite side of the room. "With respect," he said smoothly, "our family has donated millions to this institution over 2 decades. Grayson has represented Westbridge with excellence his entire life. We are not going to let one unstable student destroy everything this community has built." Unstable. The word hit Naomi harder than shouting would have. Before she could respond, a chair suddenly scraped loudly against the floor near the center row. Everyone turned. Elena Brooks stood up slowly. The room quieted almost immediately. Elena was Westbridge royalty, popular, wealthy, respected, the kind of student parents trusted automatically. Even Grayson looked confused as she stepped away from her seat. Principal Vaughn frowned. "Elena, this is not the time." "Yes, it is," she interrupted. Her voice trembled slightly, but she kept speaking. "Grayson has been doing this for years." Silence crashed across the room. Grayson's face hardened instantly. "Elena." She ignored him. "He targets people he thinks nobody will defend." She continued. "Scholarship students. Quiet kids. Mostly minorities." Her breathing shook now. But she forced herself forward. "Isaiah Brooks wasn't the first person. Naomi isn't either." Parents stared in disbelief. One board member whispered, "What is she talking about?" Grayson took a step toward Elena. "Stop." But Elena looked directly at Naomi instead. Tears filled her eyes. "There's something worse," she said softly. The entire room held its breath. Elena swallowed hard before speaking again. "There's another video." And suddenly, for the first time since the scandal began, even Grayson Hale looked afraid. The meeting ended in chaos. But the real nightmare began afterward. Parents shouted over one another while reporters crowded outside the school gates under flashing cameras. Principal Vaughn disappeared through a private hallway with the Hale family before anyone could question him further. Grayson left the building surrounded by lawyers, his expression colder than Naomi had ever seen before. But Elena Brooks did not leave with him. 30 minutes later, Naomi sat across from Elena inside the enormous Brooks family mansion. The tension between them, thick enough to suffocate the room. Rain hammered against the windows, while every television downstairs replayed clips from the explosive school board meeting. Elena looked nothing like the perfectly composed girl Naomi had first met in the cafeteria. Her mascara had smeared slightly. Her hands shook around the glass of water she could barely hold still. "You need to understand something," Elena whispered. "Grayson wasn't always this bad. Naomi stared at her coldly. That's usually how people excuse monsters. Elena flinched slightly, but continued anyway. Last year there was a student named Daniel Kim. He wasn't popular. Smart kid. Quiet. Grayson started targeting him after Daniel reported some football players for hazing freshmen. Elena's voice weakened as she spoke. At first it was rumors. Then fake posts online. Then somebody leaked private photos from Daniel's phone. Naomi felt dread slowly tighten inside her chest as Elena continued. One night Daniel disappeared after practice. They found him 2 hours later behind the gym after he tried to overdose. The room fell silent except for the storm outside. Naomi's expression hardened. And the school covered it up. Elena nodded slowly. Tears forming in her eyes. The Hales paid for therapy. Transferred him to another district. And threatened legal action against anyone who talked. She looked down at her shaking hands. Everybody pretended it never happened. For several seconds, Naomi could not speak. Every terrible suspicion she carried about Westbridge Academy suddenly felt smaller than reality itself. This was no longer about bullying. This was a machine designed to protect powerful people at any cost. Marcus arrived 20 minutes later carrying 2 hard drives and a backpack full of copied files from school servers. He looked exhausted. Dark circles hanging beneath his eyes from nights spent hiding evidence before administrators could erase it. Together, the 3 of them spread documents, screenshots, deleted messages, and archived footage across Elena's dining table, like investigators preparing a criminal case. The deeper they dug, the uglier everything became. Reports vanished after being filed. Security footage deleted, parents pressured into silence, scholarship students mysteriously transferring schools after incidents involving athletes or donors. Naomi realized Westbridge had spent years perfecting the art of burying scandals. We release everything at once, Marcus said quietly while typing rapidly on his laptop. Videos, records, screenshots, all of it. If they can't isolate one story, they can't control the narrative. Naomi nodded slowly. Then we make sure the entire city sees it. For the first time since arriving at Westbridge, Naomi felt something dangerous beginning to grow inside her. Hope, which was exactly why somebody moved quickly to destroy it. Around midnight, Elena went upstairs to take a phone call from her mother, while Marcus continued backing up files onto multiple drives. Naomi stepped into the kitchen briefly to grab water. She was gone less than 2 minutes, but when she returned to the dining room, Marcus was standing frozen beside the table. The laptop was gone. Every copied file, every archive, every backup stored on the main system. Gone. What? Naomi breathed. Marcus looked pale. I left it right here. The back patio door stood slightly open. Rainwater blew across the floor tiles from outside. Someone had been inside the house. Elena rushed downstairs moments later. Horror spreading across her face when she saw the empty table. No. She whispered. No. 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 Naomi's mind immediately raced through the possibilities. Grayson, the school administration, private investigators hired by the Hale family. Whoever it was had known exactly where the evidence would be stored, which meant somebody was watching them. The panic only worsened the next evening. Marcus texted Naomi asking to meet in the underground parking garage beneath a downtown shopping center. His messages felt rushed, nervous. By the time Naomi arrived, the garage sat nearly empty, except for flickering fluorescent lights and the distant echo of dripping water. She spotted Marcus leaning against a concrete pillar holding his ribs painfully. Blood stained the sleeve of his hoodie. Naomi ran toward him instantly. Marcus, what happened? They jumped me, he muttered, weakly. 2 guys. Masks. Fear crawled violently through Naomi's chest. Did they take anything? Marcus shook his head slowly and reached into his pocket with trembling fingers. I hid one copy before they found me. He handed her a tiny flash drive no bigger than a fingernail. Naomi stared at it like it was explosive. They knew where I was. Marcus whispered. Nobody knew except he stopped himself. Except us. The realization settled heavily between them. Someone close to their group was leaking information again. Later that night, Naomi returned to Westbridge Academy alone after receiving another anonymous message instructing her to check the old data room beneath the administration building. The campus looked almost abandoned under the stormy night sky. Hallway lights flickered dimly as thunder echoed outside. Naomi moved cautiously through the lower corridors until she reached the archive room filled with old disciplinary records and backup servers. And someone was already waiting inside. Ms. Bennett. She stood beside one of the dusty filing cabinets holding a folder tightly against her chest. Naomi froze instantly. You. Naomi said quietly. Ms. Bennett looked exhausted. Older somehow. I didn't know if you'd come. Naomi stepped closer slowly. You sent the anonymous warnings. Ms. Bennett lowered her eyes briefly before nodding. I was trying to protect you. Then why not come forward publicly? A bitter laugh escaped M's Bennett's throat. Because people who come forward here lose everything. Naomi stared at her carefully. You knew about Isaiah. About Daniel. About all of them. Yes. The answer came too quickly. Too honestly. Naomi's pulse quickened as Ms. Bennett slowly handed over the folder in her hands. Inside sat disciplinary reports connected to multiple hidden cases involving Grayson and other athletes. Official signatures covered the bottom pages. One signature made Naomi stop breathing. Ms. Bennett. Bennett. Signed approval. Signed closure. Signed confidentiality enforcement. Naomi looked up slowly. Disbelief spreading across her face. You covered it up. Miss Pruss. Bennett's eyes filled with shame instantly. I thought the school would handle it internally. I thought protecting the students quietly was better than destroying their futures publicly. Her voice cracked slightly. Then Daniel almost died. Naomi stepped backward. Everything suddenly felt unstable again. Every ally became questionable. Every truth felt contaminated. Ms. N. Bennett looked desperate now. I'm trying to fix it. Naomi stared at her for several long seconds while thunder shook the building outside. Then she asked the question that finally mattered more than fear. Whose side are you actually on? After the confrontation with Ms. Bennett in the archive room. Something inside Naomi Carter finally broke. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Quietly. Completely. The worst part about Westbridge Academy was no longer the bullying, the threats, or even Grayson Hale himself. It was the realization that every person around her carried two faces. Teachers preached integrity while signing documents that buried students' lives. Administrators spoke about safety while protecting predators. Even the people trying to help her had already betrayed someone else before. By the time Naomi returned home that night, exhaustion sat so heavily in her chest she could barely breathe. She dropped her backpack beside the couch and stared blankly at the television, while news anchors debated whether the Westbridge incident represented racial bias or simply teen conflict amplified by social media. Her own face flashed across the screen beside slowed-down footage of Grayson grabbing her in class. The internet had turned her trauma into public entertainment. Her mother muted the television instantly. That's enough, she said sharply. Naomi barely looked up. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then her mother sat across from her with red, sleepless eyes and finally said the thing Naomi had secretly feared hearing. We should leave. Naomi's expression tightened slightly. Mom, I'm serious. Her mother leaned forward desperately. These people are dangerous. They have money, lawyers, connections. You're 17 years old, and they're already trying to destroy your life publicly." Her voice cracked. "I can't keep watching this happen to you." Naomi looked away toward the dark window beside the living room. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately. To disappear from Westbridge forever. To stop waking up, terrified every morning. But another part of her kept thinking about Isaiah Brooks, Daniel Kim, all the students who had already been forced out quietly, while the system protecting Grayson remained untouched. "If I leave," Naomi whispered, "they win again." Her mother closed her eyes painfully. Maybe survival matters more than winning. The next morning proved her fears were justified. Naomi, Marcus, and Ms. Bennett met outside the local police station, carrying what little evidence they still had left after the stolen laptop incident. Marcus walked stiffly, bruises still visible near his jaw beneath the hood of his sweatshirt. Ms. Bennett looked pale and exhausted, constantly glancing over her shoulder like she expected someone to be watching them. Naomi barely trusted either of them anymore. But at this point there were no better options left. The police station smelled like burnt coffee and old paper. A tired-looking detective named Collins listened quietly while Naomi explained everything: the deleted files, the harassment, the assaults, the hidden disciplinary reports, the missing students. Marcus handed over copies of the classroom video, along with archived screenshots, before Detective Collins finally leaned back in his chair with a long sigh. "This is complicated," he said carefully. Naomi stared at him in disbelief. Complicated. Collins folded his hands together. "You're making serious accusations against a wealthy family, with no direct physical evidence connecting them to criminal activity. We have videos. Videos of students arguing." Collins corrected calmly. "Not attempted murder. Not kidnapping." Marcus leaned forward angrily. "I got attacked because of this. Can you identify who assaulted you?" Marcus hesitated. "No." The detective nodded like he already expected that answer. "Look, I'm not saying nothing inappropriate happened at that school. But legally, right now this is mostly allegations and online speculation." Naomi felt cold anger spreading through her chest. "So you're doing nothing?" Collins avoided her eyes briefly. "I'm saying there isn't enough evidence to open a formal investigation." "Not enough evidence." The same excuse again. Every institution protecting itself behind procedure while children got destroyed underneath it. Outside the station, rain poured heavily across the parking lot while Marcus punched the concrete wall hard enough to hurt his hand. "They're bought," he muttered furiously. "Every single one of them." Ms. Bennett said nothing. Naomi looked at her sharply. "You knew this would happen." "Ms. A." Bennett lowered her eyes. "The Hale family donates to half the city." For one terrifying moment, Naomi realized how deep the problem actually reached. This was never just a school scandal. It was power protecting power. Then things became even worse. By afternoon, every cloud backup connected to Marcus's hidden files suddenly vanished. Entire folders disappeared remotely. Shared drives locked permanently. Backup accounts failed to open. Naomi sat frozen in the school library, refreshing the screen over and over, while panic slowly crawled through her body. Someone had accessed everything. Again. Marcus arrived minutes later looking sick. "It's all gone." Naomi turned toward him sharply. "That's impossible." "No," Marcus whispered. "It's not." Something about his voice sounded wrong. Too guilty. Naomi stood slowly. "Marcus, what did you do?" He looked away instantly. The silence confirmed everything, before he even spoke. Marcus dragged both hands across his face shakily. "After the video went viral, Grayson found me in the parking garage before the attack. His breathing grew uneven. He knew where my little sister goes to middle school. He knew where my mom works. Marcus swallowed hard. He told me if I didn't tell him where the backup drive was hidden, they'd make my family regret it. Naomi stared at him in stunned disbelief. I didn't mean for them to erase everything. Marcus continued desperately. I thought if I gave them one location, maybe they'd stop. You told them where the hard drive was? Naomi said quietly. Marcus nodded once. The betrayal hit harder because Naomi understood exactly why he had done it. Fear. Real fear. The kind Westbridge created deliberately. Naomi stepped backward slowly, unable to process whether she wanted to scream at him or pity him. Do you understand what you destroyed? Marcus's eyes filled with shame. I was trying to protect my family. And who protects everyone else? Naomi snapped. The library fell silent around them. Students nearby pretended not to listen while secretly watching every second. Marcus looked like he might cry. I'm sorry. But apologies felt meaningless now. That night, Naomi sat alone in her bedroom staring blankly at the ceiling while thunder rolled outside. Every ally had failed her eventually. Aylin Alid. Mrs. Bennett helped bury the truth. Marcus leaked the evidence. The police refused to act. Even her mother wanted her to run away. Westbridge Academy felt less like a school and more like a machine that slowly crushed anyone who challenged it. Then her laptop chimed softly. A new email appeared. No sender. No subject line. Only one sentence inside the message. If you want to know the truth about Principal Vaughn, come to the old auditorium. Naomi stared at the screen, while rain slammed against the windows harder than before. Then another line appeared underneath. Come alone. Naomi almost turned the car around 3 separate times. Before reaching the old auditorium behind Westbridge Academy, the abandoned building sat disconnected from the main campus near the edge of the athletic fields, hidden behind overgrown trees and cracked pavement that looked untouched for years. Rain poured relentlessly across the windshield, while thunder rolled through the night sky. Every instinct told her this was a trap, but instincts had stopped mattering the moment she realized how deeply Westbridge protected its own corruption. She parked beneath a dead street lamp and stepped into the storm, pulling her hood tightly over her head as she hurried toward the side entrance. The rusted auditorium doors creaked loudly when she pushed them open, revealing darkness, thick with dust and silence. The air inside smelled old, forgotten. Naomi moved carefully through the decaying hallway, illuminated only by weak emergency lights flickering overhead. Torn theater posters still clung to the walls from productions performed years earlier. Somewhere deeper inside the building, water dripped rhythmically into metal buckets. The atmosphere felt less like a school and more like a crime scene abandoned by time. Then she saw the light. A narrow doorway near the stage stood partially open with dim yellow light spilling through the crack. Naomi approached slowly before stepping inside, and froze. The hidden room behind the auditorium was not storage. It was an archive. Dozens of filing cabinets stretched across the room. Boxes stacked floor to ceiling. Old disciplinary reports, financial records, confidential student files. Naomi's pulse quickened immediately as she pulled open the nearest drawer. Inside sat folders labeled with student names, dating back almost 10 years. Suspensions quietly dismissed. Assault allegations rewritten as misconduct disputes. Harassment complaints marked resolved without escalation. The deeper Naomi searched, the more horrifying the pattern became. Minority students, scholarship students, kids without wealthy parents or legal protection. Every single case connected somehow to athletes, donors, or powerful families. Westbridge had built an entire hidden system for burying victims. Naomi's breathing grew shallow as she opened another cabinet filled with financial statements, checks, donation contracts, confidential agreements. One folder carried Principal Vaughn's signature across nearly every page. Attached to it were records of massive financial contributions from the Hale family directly following several disciplinary incidents. Payoffs. Not rumors. Not suspicion. Proof. Naomi's hands trembled slightly as she pulled out her phone and began taking photographs rapidly. Then she noticed something even worse buried beneath the financial records settlement agreements signed by parents whose children had voluntarily transferred after harassment investigations. One name stopped her cold. Daniel Kim. Beside the file sat a payment authorization approved personally by Principal Vaughn only 2 weeks after Daniel's suicide attempt. Naomi stared at the page in disbelief. Westbridge Academy had literally paid families to disappear quietly. A floorboard creaked, somewhere nearby. Naomi spun around instantly, heart slamming against her ribs. For one terrifying second, she expected Grayson. Instead, muffled voices echoed faintly from the hallway outside the archive room. She reacted immediately. Naomi slipped behind one of the filing cabinets and activated the voice recorder on her phone just as 2 people entered the room. Principal Vaughn. And someone else? Mr. Hale. Naomi held her breath completely still while their footsteps moved closer through the archive room. This situation is getting out of control. Vaughn muttered nervously. The board is panicking. Mr. Hale sounded colder. Then control it. The girl keeps finding things. Then you should have handled it earlier. Naomi's pulse hammered violently as she listened. Vaughn lowered his voice. The media attention will fade eventually. Teenagers online move on quickly. Mr. Hale gave a humorless laugh. Not if another video surfaces. Silence followed briefly before Vaughn spoke again. We already destroyed most of the records. Most. Naomi tightened her grip around the phone, recording every word. Mr. Hale stepped closer to one of the cabinets. If Grayson goes down publicly, this school goes down with him. You understand that? Right. Vaughn answered quietly. Yes. Good. Then stop acting guilty and start acting useful. Naomi's chest tightened harder with every second. This was it. The confirmation she needed. Not speculation anymore. Not theory. Direct evidence linking the administration to years of corruption and cover-ups. Then another voice suddenly echoed from the doorway. You really should have left this alone. Naomi's blood turned cold instantly. Grayson. He stepped into the archive room slowly, wearing a black hoodie damp from rain. His expression unreadable beneath the flickering lights. Vaughn looked startled for a moment. What are you doing here? Grayson ignored him completely. Instead, he looked directly toward the filing cabinet. Naomi hid behind. He knew. Of course he knew. Naomi stepped out slowly, refusing to cower anymore, despite the terror crawling through her body. Vaughn's face drained of color immediately. Naomi, you covered all of it up. She interrupted quietly. Phone clenched tightly in her hand. Every victim. Every attack. Nobody denied it. That silence told her everything. Grayson leaned casually against one of the cabinets. Strangely calm, considering the evidence surrounding him. You still don't understand, he said softly. Naomi stared at him with open disgust. Understand what? That people don't actually want the truth. The words echoed through the archive room like poison. Grayson stepped closer slowly. They want comfort. Stability. Winners. Nobody cares about broken kids until social media tells them to. His eyes locked onto hers. And eventually social media always gets bored. Naomi shook her head. You're a psychopath. No. Grayson replied calmly. I just learned how the world works earlier than you did. Vaughn suddenly moved forward nervously. This conversation needs to stop right now. But Grayson ignored him too. He kept staring at Naomi. "You think exposing us fixes anything?" he asked quietly. "Westbridge survives because people like my family fund it. The city survives because people like my father own half of it." A faint smile touched his face. "You burn us down. Everybody burns with us." Naomi lifted her phone slightly. "I recorded everything." For the first time, Vaughn looked genuinely terrified. But Grayson only smiled wider. Then Naomi smelled smoke. At first it was faint, barely noticeable beneath the dust and rain. Then she saw it, flames crawling upward from the far side of the archive room near a toppled chemical heater. Vaughn spun around sharply. What the hell? Grayson never looked surprised. Which meant he had planned it. The fire spread terrifyingly fast through old paper files and dry cardboard boxes. Within seconds, flames leapt across entire shelves while thick black smoke filled the ceiling. Vaughn cursed loudly and rushed toward the exit. "Move!" he shouted. Naomi lunged toward the doorway, too. But Grayson suddenly grabbed a nearby metal cabinet and slammed it sideways directly into the path between her and the exit. The impact shook the room violently. Naomi stumbled backward in shock. Grayson stared at her through rising smoke and flickering orange firelight. "No one wants the truth," he said one final time. Then he walked out, leaving her behind. The flames exploded across the archive shelves almost instantly. Smoke swallowed the room. Naomi coughed violently, stumbling toward the blocked exit while fire roared around her from every direction. And suddenly she realized she was trapped. Naomi thought she was going to die inside the burning archive room. The smoke swallowed the air so fast, her lungs felt like they were collapsing from the inside. Flames tore across the old file shelves with violent crackling sounds, while heat exploded against the walls hard enough to blur her vision. Naomi wrapped her sleeve across her mouth and shoved desperately against the fallen metal cabinet blocking the doorway. But it barely moved. Panic surged violently through her chest. Grayson had not just trapped her. He had tried to erase her along with the evidence. Then she heard pounding from the other side. "Naomi, Miss Bennett's voice." A second later, the cabinet shifted violently as someone pushed from outside. Naomi forced every remaining ounce of strength into the metal frame, while smoke burned her eyes nearly blind. The cabinet scraped sideways just enough for a narrow opening to appear. "Ms. Bennett grabbed Naomi's arm instantly and dragged her into the hallway seconds before flames exploded through the doorway behind them. The two women collapsed, coughing onto the concrete floor, while fire alarms screamed throughout the abandoned auditorium. For several moments, Naomi could barely breathe. "Ms. Bennett looked terrified. "Did you get anything?" Naomi reached shakily into her hoodie pocket and pulled out her phone. "Still recording. The audio file survived." "Mrs. I." Bennett stared at the screen in disbelief, while distant sirens echoed outside through the storm. "Oh my God." Naomi slowly looked up, her face streaked with ash and sweat. "No," she whispered hoarsely. "We finish this by Monday morning." Westbridge Academy looked like a city preparing for riots. News about the fire had already spread online. Though the school publicly claimed it was caused by electrical failure in an unused facility, nobody believed it. Students filled the hallways whispering about Grayson Hale disappearing from campus since the night of the fire. Teachers looked exhausted. Administrators moved nervously between offices, while security guards suddenly appeared near every entrance. Rumors spread faster than classes could begin. And beneath all of it, Naomi prepared for war. Inside a locked classroom near the media wing, Naomi, Marcus, Elena, and Mrs. Bennett gathered around a laptop connected to the school's internal broadcasting network. Marcus typed rapidly, while multiple screens displayed copied files, hidden disciplinary reports, financial records, deleted footage, and the surviving audio from the archive room fire. You only get one shot at this, Marcus warned quietly. Once this goes public, there's no controlling what happens next. Naomi stared at the screen, showing Principal Vaughn's payment approvals connected to student cover-ups. Good. Elena looked pale but determined now. The entire school's gathered for assembly in 20 minutes. Ms. Bennett took a shaky breath. After this, they'll come after all of us. Naomi looked toward her. They already did. That ended the discussion. The annual school assembly began inside Westbridge's massive gymnasium, under bright lights and forced smiles. Hundreds of students filled the bleachers while parents, faculty, donors, and local press gathered near the lower seating area after weeks of public controversy. Principal Vaughn stood near the stage podium, visibly tense beneath the spotlight. Beside him sat Coach Darnell, multiple board members, and several anxious administrators pretending everything remained under control. But Naomi noticed something immediately. Grayson still had not appeared. The absence hung over the entire room like a storm cloud. Principal Vaughn adjusted the microphone nervously. In recent weeks, our school community has faced difficult misunderstandings, amplified by social media. The gymnasium lights suddenly flickered. Murmurs spread instantly across the crowd. Then, every screen inside the gymnasium turned black. Principal Vaughn froze. Coach Darnell stood up sharply. What's happening? The answer came 1 second later. Video footage exploded across the giant projection screens above the stage. Isaiah Brooks shoved against lockers. Daniel Kim's disciplinary reports. Deleted harassment complaints. Secret financial agreements. Students gasped loudly throughout the gym as document after document appeared publicly for the first time. Parents stood from their seats in confusion while phones immediately rose into the air, recording everything. Principal Vaughn turned white beneath the stage lights. "No, cut the feed," he shouted. "Too late." Marcus's voice echoed through the sound system remotely from the broadcasting room. Westbridge Academy buried violence for years to protect wealthy families and athletic donors. The gym erupted into chaos. Then the audio recording played. "Mr. Hale's voice, if Grayson goes down publicly, this school goes down with him." Principal Vaughn's response followed seconds later. "We already destroyed most of the records." The crowd exploded. Parents shouted over each other. Students screamed in disbelief. Reporters near the exits rushed forward with cameras raised high, while administrators desperately tried shutting down the projection system. But Marcus had locked the controls remotely. Then came the final blow. The classroom assault video replayed again on every screen, Grayson grabbing Naomi's mouth while terrified students sat frozen around them. Only this time it did not end there. Additional hidden footage appeared afterward. Grayson threatening students. Locker room harassment clips. Messages mocking scholarship kids. Evidence from years of abuse. The entire illusion surrounding Westbridge Academy collapsed publicly in real time. Principal Vaughn staggered backward from the podium, while furious parents surged toward the stage demanding answers. One woman screamed that her son had transferred after similar bullying. Another father lunged toward school board members before security intervened. Students cried openly in the bleachers. Teachers argued among themselves in panic. And through all of it, Naomi stood near the back entrance, watching the system finally devour itself. Then Coach Darnell grabbed the microphone. This was Grayson Hale. He shouted desperately over the noise. The administration didn't know the extent of his behavior. Naomi's eyes narrowed instantly. "Coward." Darnell pointed frantically toward the screens, still displaying evidence. "Grayson manipulated people. He hid things from faculty. We were deceived too." Principal Vaughn looked horrified. "Coach, you protected him?" Vaughn suddenly shouted back. The two men turned on each other publicly within seconds. Board members began yelling. Teachers denied involvement. Everybody scrambled to save themselves now that the truth could no longer be contained. Exactly like Naomi expected. But then she noticed something wrong. Elena approached her quickly through the chaos, face pale with fear. "He's gone." Naomi frowned. "Who, Grayson?" A cold feeling spread instantly through Naomi's stomach. Elena shook her head nervously. Nobody's seen him since the fire. Naomi looked around the exploding gymnasium filled with screaming parents, collapsing reputations, flashing cameras, and terrified administrators. But one person was missing from all of it. The boy at the center of the storm. Grayson Hale had vanished. And somehow, Naomi knew the nightmare was not over yet. By Tuesday morning, Westbridge Academy no longer looked like a school. It looked like the scene of a political scandal collapsing in real time. Satellite news vans crowded the streets outside the campus gates, while reporters shouted questions at terrified administrators trying to avoid cameras. Police vehicles lined the front entrance. Parents argued loudly across the parking lot, holding printed screenshots from the leaked files. Students stood in groups filming everything for social media, while national news stations replayed clips from the hacked school assembly on giant screens behind anchors, discussing systemic corruption inside elite education. Naomi watched the chaos from inside her mother's car parked across the street, barely recognizing the place that had once made her feel small enough to disappear. Now the entire country was staring directly at it. The fallout spread faster than anyone expected. Federal investigators arrived before noon after financial records connected Principal Vaughn to undisclosed donor transactions and hidden settlement agreements involving students. FBI agents walked through the administration building, carrying sealed evidence boxes, while cameras flashed violently outside the entrance. Vaughn attempted to leave through a side hallway before agents stopped him publicly in front of reporters. Students crowded against classroom windows watching in disbelief, as the principal, who once controlled every narrative, was escorted toward an unmarked vehicle under federal investigation. "This is insane," one student whispered behind Naomi in the hallway. "No," Naomi thought quietly. "This is what accountability looks like." Coach Darnell lasted only 4 more hours before the school board announced his immediate termination during an emergency press conference. By then, several parents had already filed lawsuits, accusing Westbridge Academy of negligence, discrimination, emotional abuse, and institutional cover-ups stretching back years. Former students began posting their own stories online after seeing Naomi's videos. More names surfaced every hour. More victims. More hidden incidents. The machine protecting Grayson Hale had finally cracked wide open. And now everyone who once stayed silent scrambled desperately to save themselves. But Grayson himself still had not appeared. That frightened Naomi more than anything else. By evening, Westbridge held a final emergency board meeting inside the conference hall, where everything had started spiraling weeks earlier. Only now the atmosphere felt completely different. Security guards stood near every exit. Reporters packed the back rows. Lawyers whispered urgently into phones while exhausted board members argued beneath fluorescent lights that made everyone look sick. Naomi sat beside Elena, Marcus, and her mother while cameras continuously flashed around the room. Nobody ignored Naomi anymore. People moved out of her path now. People watched her carefully, like she had become dangerous. A board member stepped nervously toward the microphone. "Due to recent evidence made public, Westbridge Academy will undergo immediate independent investigation." The rear doors slammed open violently. The entire room turned instantly. Grayson Hale stood in the doorway. Gasps spread through the hall. For the first time since Naomi met him, Grayson no longer looked untouchable. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His clothes were wrinkled. Rage and exhaustion twisted together beneath the calm mask he usually controlled perfectly. 2 security guards moved toward him immediately. But Grayson ignored them completely. He looked only at Naomi. The room fell silent. Naomi slowly stood from her chair. Every instinct in her body screamed that something terrible was about to happen. Grayson walked forward slowly through rows of terrified parents and reporters, while cameras instantly pointed toward him from every direction. One reporter shouted his name. Another asked if he planned to surrender to police. Grayson answered nobody. Then he stopped only a few feet away from Naomi. "You happy now?" he asked quietly. Naomi held his stare. "You did this to yourself." A bitter smile crossed his face. "No. You did." He glanced around the room filled with cameras. Reporters. Lawsuits. And chaos. "You destroyed everything." Naomi felt anger rise instantly. Everything was already rotten. Grayson stepped closer. Security moved again. But he raised one hand sharply without looking away from her. "You think these people care about you?" he asked softly. "Look around. They don't care about justice. They care about spectacle." His voice darkened. "The second another scandal appears, they'll move on and forget every victim you tried to save." Naomi pulled her phone slowly from her pocket. Then she opened Livestream. The notification sound echoed faintly in the silent room. Thousands joined within seconds. Grayson noticed immediately. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. Naomi lifted the phone slightly higher between them. "No more hidden rooms," she said calmly. "No more erased evidence. Say whatever you want now. Everyone's watching." The live stream comments exploded instantly. "He's live. That's Grayson Hale. Don't let him leave." Grayson stared directly into the camera for several long seconds, while reporters nearby quickly realized the confrontation was broadcasting publicly in real time. More phones rose around the room, recording everything from different angles. Then something inside him finally snapped. "You want the truth," he shouted suddenly. "Fine." The room froze. Grayson pointed violently toward the school board members. They all knew his voice cracked with fury. "My father paid them. Vaughn protected me because the school needed us. Every teacher stayed quiet because winning mattered more than students." The room erupted instantly. Board members screamed over one another. Reporters rushed forward. Security guards moved closer. But Grayson kept talking. Years of buried rage exploding publicly all at once. "You think I became this alone?" he yelled. "This entire place made me." Naomi stared at him silently, while livestream numbers climbed higher and higher. Millions now. Not local anymore. National. Grayson's breathing grew uneven as police officers suddenly entered through the side doors behind him. Someone in the crowd shouted that officers had a warrant connected to obstruction, intimidation, and evidence tampering charges. Grayson turned sharply toward the movement. Realizing too late, there was nowhere left to run. For one final moment, his eyes returned to Naomi. Not arrogant anymore. Not untouchable. Just angry. Broken. Defeated. "You ruined my life," he whispered. Naomi's expression never changed. "No," she replied quietly. "You ruined other people's lives. I just stopped staying silent about it." The officers grabbed Grayson seconds later. Cameras exploded with flashes, while reporters shouted questions from every direction. Parents moved aside. Students watched in absolute silence as the boy who once controlled the entire school was handcuffed publicly and escorted out through the same hallways where everyone used to fear him. This time nobody defended him. Nobody moved to protect him. Nobody looked away. Hours later, after the police cars disappeared and reporters finally began leaving campus, Naomi walked alone through the main hallway of Westbridge Academy one last time. The building felt strangely quiet now, exhausted, hollow. Lockers lined the walls exactly as they had on her first day there. But the atmosphere had changed completely. Students standing nearby slowly stepped aside as she approached. Not out of fear. Out of respect. Naomi passed the exact locker where someone once taped a photo of her face beside the words, "Know your place." The paper was gone now. Only faint tape marks remained beneath the fluorescent lights. She stopped briefly beside it, then kept walking forward. This time, nobody laughed. Nobody whispered. Nobody tried to make her smaller. And as Naomi Carter disappeared down the hallway that once terrified her, one truth remained hanging over Westbridge Academy, stronger than every lie that had protected it for years. The most dangerous thing to people abusing power is someone who refuses to stay silent. And just like that, the people who spent years silencing others were finally forced to hear the truth out loud. Westbridge Academy wasn't destroyed by one girl. It was destroyed by the lies, fear, racism, and corruption that people kept protecting because staying comfortable was easier than doing what was right. Naomi Carter simply refused to bow her head like everyone expected her to. And in the end, that terrified them more than anything else ever could. But here's the real question. If you were in Naomi's position, would you have kept fighting after everything they did to her? Or would you have walked away to protect yourself? Let me know in the comments. I really want to hear your thoughts. And if this story kept you hooked until the end, don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who loves intense drama stories, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories about justice, revenge, and people finally standing up against those who think they're untouchable.